Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all comes down to one thing, a deep understanding of motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. Well, we are in the midst of a series on an introduction to writing with emotion. This series is especially designed for anyone who has purchased my book, Writing with Emotion. This is a great series to watch while you're waiting for the book to arrive, as it explains the concepts that are present in the book. So when you dive into the book, you'll know where you're going, and it won't seem quite so much like you're in a totally new world. Well, because it's a prelude to the book, that means it also works standalone for anyone who maybe has no interest in getting the book at all, but just wants to understand human motivation better. Well, today we're going to be talking about a concept that shows up in fiction. It's the arc of emotions. Mostly people are talking about the arc of the story, and what is presented in the arc is the plot and how the plot unfolds. Well, we're going to be taking a look at it from the character motivation side of things, and we're going to be looking at the arc of emotions of the character. How do the emotions of the character traits change as the story progresses? Besides being of enormous value for your story, it also has implications for anyone who wants to make a change in their life. And that will be rather interesting to show, because if you can identify which character traits you want to change and where those traits currently sit in your own character profile diagram, then you will have a much better understanding after this episode of what you need to do to actually accomplish the changes that you desire, because sometimes you can't go at it directly. So come on over to the down-facing camera and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, working from our original syllabus, we are now in section C. Plot is often driven by changes in the emotional profile of your character. So here's the card that we made back when we were setting out the outlines of the mini course. And that is that the character was going to experience a number of changes through the arc of your story. And the changes in his emotional makeup are going to parallel in many ways the arc of the events of your story. And we will find out that in many cases, the arc of emotions is just as important as the arc of the events of the story. And in fact, very often the changes in the emotional profile of the character are what actually drives the story. Now, we're going to make the claim here that the changes your character experiences in his emotional makeup are made visible by using a character profile diagram. Now, we demonstrate that these changes have taken place in our character in one of two ways. Either we show it through the behavior of our character, which indicates that the character trait is now in a different position in the character profile diagram, or else we listen to conversations going on in the character's head and notice that the voices have changed. But in any case, the character profile diagram is going to make these emotional changes visible. Well, what's that going to look like? Since we're talking about the character profile diagram, let's quickly review that diagram first. We saw that we made a colorful version that showed the character traits being deposited along these points on the rim of the circle. And then we also made a stick figure version that was easier to draw, where we write the character traits again at certain points that effectively fall around a circle, but the circle isn't drawn in. We tied those character trait positions to voices that were present in the character. And we said we had three voices: the voice of the struggle, the voice of the loss, and the voice of the victory. And so if for a quick review here, up here at the pinnacle position, all we have is one voice, the voice of loss. At the wing position, we have struggle and loss. Down here at the rudder, we have all three. In the anchor, we have struggle and victory. And down here at the base, we only have victory. And that's a quick review of what we've done in previous days. So now that we've reviewed what the character profile looks like, let's talk about the types of changes that are possible in your character's profile. And what we'll find is that character traits only move one position at a time. When we get into some advanced work, there are some instances of flipping, but we're not going to cover them at this stage. We're at the introductory level. So we're just going to confine ourselves, because it's also the main way, is that character traits will shift only one character position at a time. So that means pinnacle could go back and forth with wing, wing with rudder, rudder with anchor, and anchor with base. But even though all of those changes are possible, there are only two possible changes that are under your character's control. And that is the change from rudder to anchor or the change from rudder to wing. Only the rudder traits themselves are under conscious control of your character. Well, that leaves us with a big open question. How do those other character traits move then? And here's the answer. When a rudder trait moves down into the anchor position, then the most closely associated wing trait moves into the rudder and pulls a pinnacle trait into the wing. When a rudder trait goes up to the wing, then the most closely associated anchor trait moves into the rudder and pulls a base trait into anchor. So what the changes start from the rudder and they cascade to the other position. That's an awful lot to absorb at one time, so we're actually going to stop it there and continue with the arc of emotions in tomorrow's episode. But let's take a quick review of what we've presented here. We began with the card from our syllabus, where we say plot is often driven by changes to the emotional profile. And then we looked at three aspects of that. And we said that the character profile diagram was going to show us what changes are possible. And those changes were changes between any two adjacent positions. But we noted that all change is actually driven from the rudder position, since that's the only place where the character can make a totally free choice. So then how do the other positions change? Well, when the rudder trait moves down into the anchor position, a previous wing trait will come into the rudder position, and a pinnacle trait will come into the wing. The opposite is also possible. If the character trait was in the rudder position and the character goes more chaotic, then that can slip up into the wing. And when that happens, a previous anchor trait can pull up into the rudder position, and a character trait that was previously in the base position can now move up into the anchor position. So it can go in either direction, but it all is cascading changes to the other positions from a change in the rudder. So that's all for today, but as a sneak preview of what we're going to get tomorrow, we're going to see character traits move through different positions on the character profile diagram, and we're going to note that they create an arc of movement, but that's for tomorrow. So if you want your writing tip for today, it's to notice that your character cannot make any changes directly out of a wing position or out of a pinnacle position to bring about change in his life. Only the rudder position is accessible. So that's going to leave us with some interesting story elements that we will explore tomorrow. It also has a lot of implications if you are talking about change in your own life. One of the things that can be very frustrating for us as we try to get rid of bad habits or make some resolution that we've been trying year after year to achieve and we're never getting there, listen for the voices that are going on in your head. Now, I'm no psychologist, so this is just taking advice out of a fictional story, so it has no more value than that, so take that in mind. But if you wanted to play with it as a recreational idea, shall we say, if you notice that the voices in your head for something that you want to change are nagging, and you're not hearing any voices of encouragement, then you know what you need to do if you actually want to make that change. You've either got to start injecting those voices of encouragement, even if they seem a bit artificial to you at first, or else the simpler way is to find something that you're working with right now where the choice could go either way. You're conscious of all three voices, and maybe you're not consistent in making the choice that you would prefer. So if you stick with that trait for a while and consistently make the choices for stability, then when that trait shifts down into the anchor position, it will pull that trait that you're fighting with down into the rudder where you can get a handle on it. at least theoretically speaking from the standpoint of how you would write a story. But as far as your story goes, if you want your character's change to be believable, only move his character positions one at a time. And tomorrow we'll take a look more at the shape of the story arc and what kind of stories you get out of what kinds of movements. See you then. Bye-bye.